Thank you all for coming. I'm looking forward to talking to Dame Sally now. These conversations are always interesting because we never know what's going to happen. We certainly don't. I would just say at the outset that technically we are in purdah, which has no impact on me, but it does on Sally. I don't intend to ask her her opinion about the present government or any future government, so that should be okay. But we have been told it's okay to record, but this won't be put up till after the general election. But just bear that in mind when we get to questions at the end. She can't answer anything too political, I think is the point. But I don't think the point of these conversations is to get political anyhow. So thank you very much for coming. We will sort of progress through your life if that's okay. But perhaps I can begin with something that I found quite telling, and I wonder if it was formative in your character. And that is that I understand you failed the 11 plus. And to overcome that, if perhaps explain some of the resilience you now show when you're dealing with your political masters.
Or dealing with life in general. Yes, I think it is true. I think it matters. If you look at dyslexia and mild Asperger's, people are often very intelligent but don't do well in standard testing, and then they find ways to compensate and come through, and it gives you a resilience. So it was difficult. Both my parents were academics. My father was a professor. This was not seen as what one should do. And I didn't realise I had a learning problem, in fact, until I was a consultant and I was writing something on the board, the whiteboard, so it wasn't ages ago. And the neurologist afterwards said, "Have you ever considered how you invert letters and do numbers?" And I said, no. And he said, "Well, I bet you're dyslexic." And so I've probably got, as we call it in our family, some funny brain wiring.
But that didn't ultimately hold you back.
No.
Because people, dyslexia, which was hardly talked about when you and I were growing up, is now sort of a big thing. And people, I think, get very anxious. If they are identified early on, it almost makes it worse, perhaps.
Well, one of our daughters has funny brain wiring, and she has extra time to learn, and it is quite clear she needs longer to learn things. And I can tell you, I'm extraordinarily bad at remembering people's names and things like that, and they relate. So I think there are advantages to knowing, because then you can attribute your failings to it or get extra time, as long as it doesn't detract from the fact that you still have to make a living and a way in life.
Yes. But clearly, having overcome this initial hurdle, you didn't presumably find it too catastrophic as you progressed up through school, university?
I found multiple choice exams impossible. In fact, as I was explaining to daughter, who was doing one earlier this week, I failed a few at medical school. And it is how my brain works. And even now, I sit in meetings and I realise my brain is working quite differently from other people.
Why are multiple choice questions worse?
It's something to do with the way I learn. So I'm not very good at learning facts. I always used to work everything out from first principles and be quite articulate. So if I'm writing short notes or essays, I'm quite good at it.
Right. Okay. So you came from an academic family. Did that put pressure on you?
Yes. It wasn't, are you going to university? It's which one and what are you going to do?
And did you know?
No, but the school told me I would fail to get into Oxford or Cambridge, so I'd better not try. I was too young for university college, so I plumped for Manchester. And I wanted to do medicine because we were talking earlier about what inspires young people. And I was very inspired and still fascinated by the double helix and reading Watson's book, The Double Helix. So I sat in interviews in medical schools and they said, "Why do you want to do medicine?" "Because the double helix is so beautiful and I want to work on that."
So it was a book, not a person or people that inspired
for me it was
you.
a book.
I mean, I find that very interesting because people say to you, "Well, who inspired you?" And I think, well, Actually, no, it was books. It was facts.
My biology teacher was not inspiring. She banged people's knuckles with Bunsen burners and didn't teach us the whole syllabus. No, they weren't. And she didn't teach us the whole syllabus. I had to go off and mug it up from books.
Was that 'cause she didn't know it?
I think she just ran out of time. She just wasn't an inspiration.
Yes. Yes. I mean, my teacher was very competent, my physics teacher, and I was very, very lucky in that I had a physics teacher who had a physics degree, which is often, I think, why physics teaching is so bad, because they are actually biology teachers having to do it. But she wasn't inspirational. She was just competent. Yours wasn't even that, by the sound of it.
Marginally, yes.
So you wanted to do medicine because you fell in love with double helix. You could just have done biology.
Could have done, but I suppose I quite liked people and I thought about the caring side. I'm the first medic in the family. The other thing, if you have an academic family, is you don't want to let them down, but I didn't want to compete. I wanted to go and do something quite different and separate, so there was no competition. Then my younger brother became a medic, but that was after, so I could cope with that.
And he could presumably cope with it too. Yes. So your mother was an engineer?
My mother did natural science tripos here, which she was one of those old bats who got a first actually, but didn't get a degree and came back and was, there was a whole trail of buses in the late 90s.
Yes.
And was particularly taken by hydraulics. C.P. Snow sent her to the Admiralty during the war.
Okay, C.P. Snow was a fellow here,
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, right. So, yes, so she was a mathematician with a particular interest in hydraulics.
Okay, right. And your father was a theologian?
Yes.
And you didn't want to follow in his footsteps?
No. But, actually, I'm very driven by his values.
Right.
I mean, people talk about things on your shoulder. My father's values and my father's voice as I work around the ethics and everything is very much on my shoulders. And when I was clinically active and he was still alive, if I had a big ethical problem that I couldn't work through, I would ring him up and say, what do I do about this? And we'd debate the ethics of a clinical problem or something down the phone.
Right. So he didn't have set ideas?
No, he would debate them.
I guess that's because he was an academic theologian to some extent.
And he also didn't try and push his views on us as children. So my first husband had a very low sperm count and we couldn't have children, so we looked at artificial insemination by a donor. And then I said I couldn't go through with it. And only after I divorced him did my father turn around and say, I'm so glad you didn't do that, because I decided it was a form of adultery. So I said, well, I disagree. But quite apart from disagreeing, why didn't you tell me at the time? Because if you were going to be unhappy that I was having a form of adultery,
Gosh.
Well, because you have to decide for yourself.
Yes.
I still think you disagree with him.
Yes, but I can see in a very sort of abstract sense why.
Yes.
But that's not what it's all about.
No,
okay.
Exactly.
So perhaps we should, I don't want to leave your first husband, as it were, because there's another really intriguing thing about your life, in that you threw up medicine and became a diplomat's wife.
Yes, he was in the Foreign Office. So two things, he was very intelligent and charming, and I was very stuck in Manchester, and so they came together and I went off to be a diplomat's wife in Madrid. I was not a success as a diplomat's wife.
Would you like to enlarge upon that?
Well, I learned Spanish, how to cook and how to ski, but I was too independent. Wives were there at that stage in the 70s to be seen and do the cooking and not heard, whereas I'd meet these politicians and I'd start asking about Franco or democracy and having a debate. And that wasn't really what wives were supposed to do.
Yes, I'm trying to remember what I know about Hedy Lamarr, who was a film star, but she actually, when she was being brought up in Germany, I think her father must have been a captain of industry or something. She went to lots of dinners and listened to all they were saying about highly technical stuff. And some of the stuff she did when she went to the States actually underpins, I don't know, GPS or something. She's got patents to her name. This is not well known about Hedy Lamarr. But again, she had kept quiet, but listened to all this stuff. And I think then, when she became a film star, used her position to draw things out of people, to learn all this. And then on the side, she started patenting. So, yeah, learning from listening is it's not a bad way to pick up stuff.
And what I did pick up was how the civil service works. So a lot of people were very surprised, as I'm so very direct, that when I went in I actually went into the civil service on secondment for many years to run research for the NHS. But when I became the chief medical officer, they said I had to be a civil servant, even though I'm an independent advisor. And everyone wondered how I'd cope in the civil service. And of course, I knew how it worked, by the written word, by hierarchy, and there's a bit of yes minister in there too. I have told a minister he was very brave once.
And how was that received?
He said, have I seen that on television? I said, yes, and I meant it that way. There was no one else there.
Oh, yes, okay. We won't ask which minister. So your time as diplomat's wife was frustrating?
It was, in one sense, but I did, as I said, learn how to speak Spanish and cook and ski. But I also discovered I wanted to be a doctor, that I enjoyed it. So I went back with renewed vigour.
So at what point did you had practiced?
I'd done 2 years as a postgraduate, so I'd registered and done my first post-registration year. So then I copped out for 4 years, then I came back. And I actually became a consultant with all my contemporaries because I was so motivated that I just came back in and got on with it.
So what had changed? Was it you? Was it the NHS? What had changed in those 4 years that made it work the second time around?
Me not feeling I was stuck on a treadmill, but choosing to go onto that treadmill because I had 4 years out. I could have stayed a wife. I could have tried something else. But, oh my golly, I did all those years. I actually like it. I'm probably quite good at it. That's what I'm going to do.
And when you first gave it up, one of the things I know about myself is I hate giving things up as an admission of failure. There's probably only been one real thing I have given up because I just knew I couldn't do it, and that was being a suicide counsellor. So,
yes, that's tough.
It was tough. So, did you mind giving up the first time?
I didn't at the beginning, and then I did because I started to resent that I was no longer a person. I was just an appendage called a wife. That didn't suit me. And the other was I began to miss it.
Right.
But I read voraciously.
About medicine or
no,
about anything?
Mainly novels. I read wonderfully for years.
So you're very well educated.
I was, yes. I have a bad memory.
You can still hold your own at any dinner conversation.
I can try.
So you came back. You actually said of that first period, if I remember rightly, that it was brutalising.
Well, before I left, yes, those 2 years in Manchester, I found medicine very brutalising. And it has changed a lot, though it's quite brutal in a different way now because junior doctors are treated like fodder rather than as people. But things like I worked on a renal ward and there was not enough renal dialysis for people. So there was very obvious rationing. 1 in 3 would get the dialysis, and who would? And I was very upset by the fact that a young woman in her early 20s who'd had a baby and her kidneys had packed up afterwards was deemed not responsible enough to cope with the diet and the drugs, so why waste it on her? And I just thought this was awful. And she died in my arms a couple of months later, in the middle of the night. And it was just horrid. And remembering things like, a small child would die. They wouldn't send the trolley for it. They'd wrap it in a blanket and give it to a young nurse and say, just take that down to the mortuary. So it was quite...
Yes.
Yeah, I found it difficult.
And when you came back, was it better?
Or
was
it
just
lot.
you
It
were
hadn't
tougher?
changed that much, but I'd found more inner strength, perhaps.
Yes. Can you explain where that came from? Because developing inner strength to cope with whatever horrible situation you're in is something that is a vital life skill, and no one ever teaches you.
No, they don't. And I think experience is the only way to experience things and then to learn from it and to learn. I have learnt that I'm very resilient. I mean, my second husband died, and I learnt I was resilient. I could, painful as it was, come through that and find strength from having been loved and lost rather than not loved, and everything. So I think it is through experience I learnt.
And you go on acquiring more experience.
Day in, day out.
Yes, and you need more resilience in your current role, I expect, than in...
Yes. The knocks are quite hefty, whether they're the Daily Mail photographing our recycling after the CMO alcohol guidelines, to try and find out that I'm drinking more than our guidelines, and going into my daughter's Instagrams or whatever. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I don't really want to debate the Daily Mail here.
No,
let's not. No, let's not go there. So you then moved from being consultant, whatever, into research. So what prompted that move?
So there I was working away as a consultant, and I built a small research program of my own. And then someone came along and said, in the early 90s, we run in every region a small research grant scheme, and would you like to sit on the committee because you do research? And I said, why, what are you looking for? I've applied for some grants and I've got some small ones and I'm doing this, but I'm not a professor, you know, most of the people are professors. And to be fair, what they said was, well, actually we need a laboratory doctor. I'm a haematologist, so I tick that box. We could do with someone from a district general hospital, so I tick that box, and we'd love a woman. So I said, all right, I tick the boxes, I'll try it. And the joke was, of course, I went and said nothing for a year while I learnt the ropes. Then I started to say something, and after 3 years, they asked me to chair it. Then I chaired it, and turned out to be quite good at it, but I didn't know I would be. It
was like the first thing you chaired?
Outside the hospital, yes.
Yes.
And it was, you know, it was a few £1 million, and it mattered to people whether they got them or not. And it mattered to me then, it still matters, that if I do something, I do it properly. I like to do it well.
And it's interesting, because again, you said you sort of spent a year listening.
Mm.
And that's where you got your experience. Now, some people, as soon as they sit on a committee, feel they've got to make their mark. They've got to start speaking instantly.
Yes.
Regardless of whether they have anything to say.
Absolutely true. Funny, isn't it?
It is funny. We've all met them.
Am I allowed to say it's more often the men, but not always?
I was trying not to say that.
Yeah. Not always.
It's not always, no. And I think, I mean, that's one of the problems, because if a newcomer thinks that's the way to get on, because that's how it's always been done, and yet it isn't, because sometimes you do make yourself look very stupid.
Well, I think there's that. I think there's also character, because I remember in my time a bit later when I was a regional director of R&D, a number of biggish meetings where I'd listen and I'd think, oh yeah, that's interesting, but I'm not sure that fits with that, and I wouldn't do it that way. And then someone would ask a question, and I'd think, but if you listen to the lecture, the answer was in the lecture, and there would be all these people asking questions, and I'd think, why do they waste our time asking those questions? And then I realised they were A, extrovert, and B, trying to make their mark. And
Yes.
I thought, oh, well, let's leave them to make their mark.
Yes. And you get those at committees, you get them anywhere. Yeah. And then to come on to your chairing, an interesting test as a chair is to try and stop people like that derailing.
Yeah.
And it's always an interesting experience when you first get a committee together, as it were, and you have no idea of the characters of the people, and trying to work out how to play it, as it were, how to make sure that you head off in the same direction. I'm very conscious of this, because last week I chaired the interdisciplinary advisory panel for the REF, and it was 15 people, of whom I met a couple. Most of them were coming, from very different backgrounds, dance and things, classics, philosophy. So I didn't know them, and trying. You have several hours to get some sensible ideas. So people watching.
Yes, very important.
Very important. And again, it's not a skill that is certainly typically taught to an academic. I believe civil servants are taught better
Yes.
much of this, from what I've learned. But as an academic, you don't get taught these things. And are you...
But even then, you need the emotional intelligence. So I was landed with an amazing one it must have been a month ago. So I've been doing this campaign on drug-resistant infections, antimicrobial resistance, with the support of the government, and we got the UN to set up a coordination committee for the whole world, but particularly all the different bits of the UN, to make sure that we move it forwards. So I had expected to be chair, but no, the Deputy Secretary-General and the Director-General of the WHO have to be chair, but there would be a convener who'd do all the work. I thought that would be me, but no, we have to have political correctness, so you've got to have the South, and you've got, for AMR, to have not only human health, but food chain and agriculture and all sorts of things, so there were 3 conveners. So there we all were, with all the different bits of the UN, all with baggage, and 15 experts, most without English as their natural language, all with baggage. And it starts all right. And then the Director General of the WHO turns to the whole committee, about 30 people, and says, well, why don't you ban colistin from animal use? Because that would save a lot of lives. At which point there was uproar, because the animal people said, you can't do that, and we have processes. And after about 15 minutes of uproar, she said, I've got to go now. Sally's going to chair. I was left with What? You've just flung a bomb into the room.
What a clever tactic.
It's a bomb, you walk out. And then I looked, and actually the agenda was blank. So I sorted out the bomb and decommissioned it and agreed the processes need to be put in place, but got most people to agree we probably shouldn't use it in animals. Then I said, right, so if I'm chairing at the moment, where's the rest of the agenda? Oh, the Director General didn't think we should have an agenda because she didn't know what people would want to talk about. Oh, shit. People have flown from all around the world. I want them to move forward, and we haven't got it anywhere. We sorted it.
But I'm sure you accomplished quite a lot.
It was quite a tough one, that one.
Yes, and you hadn't seen it coming.
No, which was perhaps stupid of me.
Well, maybe it's an advantage. I mean, so that you could just think on your feet.
As it comes.
So training. Let's discuss training, because you have actually had some management training.
Yes. So after I chaired that committee, I was then asked to compete, but there was no competition. That's another story. To become the regional director of research. And we had a certain amount of money in the NHS in each region for research. It was to do with a declaration. And most of the money was in London, the bit that I was responsible for. And there were 7 other regional directors. And what kept happening was they would kind of gang up and try and beat me up to take the money out of London and take it to the rest of the country. And my line was quite simple. If you can show it'll be better spent, then that will be fine. But you can't show it'll be better spent, so you can't do that. But after about a year, I went to my boss and said, the skills that got me this job are not the skills I need for this job. We have 3 choices. I burn out, and I refuse to. I leave, and I'm happy to. Or you pay to train me. So he said, no brainer, we'll pay. So it will cost you dear, because I will only do the best training. So I went off and asked, and I had small children at the time, and my husband very reasonably said, I don't mind you going off for a week at a time, but you can't go and do 3 weeks or 6 weeks or something and leave us all. That doesn't work. So I found a course at the European Business School, INSEAD in Fontainebleau, where I could go on a Sunday afternoon and back on a Friday evening. And it was about leadership and emotional intelligence. So in 2000, it cost the region £20,000 to send me on this course. But it was life-changing, let alone career-changing, because it was about emotional intelligence and how you work with people. And as I've gone up the system, not only do I take the learning, but I realise more and more how success, you have to be intelligent. But if you can't work with people, then you can't achieve anything. You can't make things happen.
Yes, I don't know who's the most senior person from the university here, but I think they should listen, because you watch young academics who are very smart in terms of their research, and they're suddenly thrown in the deep end. So last night I was talking at the Miller Centre to a group of people who are about to start running their own research groups and trying to talk about the things that they need to consider, which is, how to make your group cohere, how to listen to them, all the rest of it. Now, I've never had any training at all, but I knew more from experience than they did. But we don't train our future leaders at all in academia, it seems to me. It's sink or swim. And the people who rise up are sometimes brilliant at it and sometimes less so.
Absolutely. So actually, because of my experience, and then I went on and had coaching for many years, which was super. When we set up the National Institute for Health Research, NIHR, I insisted we spent a couple of million a year on leadership training, and Ashridge ran that, and it was very good. A lot of the people who were on the first rung of that, or the first rollout of the programme, ended up deans and vice-chancellors.
So what stage in their careers were they getting that training?
They were group leaders or programme leaders,
Right.
So kind of young to mid-range career. They weren't the deans, they were running things, but they were big early career, and they've done really well, that lot.
So you think these skills can be taught?
Yes. For instance, in coaching, I would go and have a couple of hours. They were focused on me, what I was doing, how I was doing it, and I could discuss problems. So one problem, and we've all been there, is to sit in a meeting, and there's someone I had who would sit in this board who I really respected, but his delight appeared to be to wait till the end and then dissect what you'd said and destroy you. And I had to present something important, and I went to my coach and said, I'm doing this in a couple of days' time, and I'm really worried because I don't know how to handle this and I'm going to be destroyed. So he got me to talk about the style of this man, which was actually to wait till the end and then intellectually dismember it. And he said, oh, well, that's actually quite easy. What you do is you put forward a bit of it and then you say, so, bloggings, it's really important to me that I know you think that's all right, or your view is very important. Have you got any comment? So I got him signed up at every stage. So we got to the end, and all he could say was, yeah. But, I would never have known that.
No.
I might have learnt it in the end, but I'd have had a lot more car crashes along the way, whereas a coach helped me dissect it. What was it that was bugging me? How did I stop that being an issue?
Now, you have a reputation, which I imagine you're quite proud of, for plain speaking.
Yes.
Does your coach ever tell you that you should get more weasel-worded?
No, my coach would say to me that we are at our best when we're authentic. And actually, for all I'm plain speaking, people generally take it pretty well.
Because you're not trying to score points.
Yeah, exactly. It is the truth,
yes.
But it's not, It's, hey, look, you're no good at this, and we really ought to get you doing what you're good at. And,
yes.
Or that won't work. Come on. Help me think about what will work. But trying to do it nicely, lightly where possible.
And that works with civil servants and with ministers?
Well, ministers are very individual, aren't they? I am in a privileged position, statutorily independent, 168 years in the making of the post, and technically good. And I start from a different position from, I think, my predecessors. So I walk into the room and say to ministers, so imagine me on Friday or Monday, I'll say, hello, I'm your chief medical officer. I'm here to help. So I start from that perspective, which is, not, you can't do that. If what you're trying to get is that endpoint, then I wouldn't do it that way.
Right. Well, we'll be watching with whoever is the new Minister of State.
Bouncing and saying, hello, I'm here to help.
Yes. Yes. So we can't ignore gender. You have done a great deal for women in academia by your insistence on Athena Swan in the medical.
I tied money to it.
You tied money to it. And lots of other funders will explain, for reasons I understand, why they can't do explicitly that. Nevertheless, that requirement of a silver Athena Swan Award transformed the landscape, not just for the clinical schools, but for everyone. How did you come up with that idea?
So we have in NIHR, which as of April last year, I don't run any longer, a system of putting out about £800 million over 5 years for biomedical research centres, which are essentially experimental medicine. And we dish it out based on the strength of the partnership between hospitals and universities and their science. And we use an international panel to decide, and they shortlist, and then they interview, shortlist. And year one, back in 2007 or 8, we actually had a battle bus. It was one of those footballers' buses. It was such fun, with lovely tables and comfy sofas to go to sleep on, and we were driven around the country and interviewed people in situ, which was very interesting, with all these wonderful people from around the world. And a couple of them asked the gender question, and they'd say, so what are you doing to support women in science? And the answers were not good. In fact, you may well have been there. When we came to Cambridge, they put the panel on the stage. There were 50 academics out there, and when the question was asked, they all looked round and pointed at a woman and said, was it you? I think it might have been.
No, I wasn't involved.
They pointed at a woman and said, you're the token woman answer. So when we got to the second time, 5 years later, and the question was asked, the NHS bits were fine, but the medical schools, I thought, were embarrassing. I was really embarrassed by what they said. And I was actually very angry because they were demeaning women and not understanding the issue. Well, they weren't supportive, let alone understanding the problems you might have in trying to manage families and children and everything. And I stewed on it for about a week, and then I'd known about the Athena Swan system, and I thought it would be good way of trying to market. So I went in after about a week, after we'd finished, and said to my number 2 in the department, I've written this letter, I want to send it to every medical school head, every vice-chancellor, everyone I can think of, tying the money to getting Athena Swan silver. What do you think? So, because he always kept me clean, so he read it, and he said, I said, all right, what do you think? And he said, well, it could be the biggest thing you do for science in this country. So I said, do you think I should do it? And he said, well, it's risky. So I said, all right, I'm going to do it. Just improve the letter. So he was great at drafting, so he improved the letter. So we sent it. And the minute the button was pressed, he said, ha ha, you didn't ask ministers. And I said, should I have done? And he said, well, probably. Well, I said, all right. So we'll just have to pretend. So we spent a whole year not telling anyone I'd never asked ministers. This was policy. I'd sent it out. And the following year, I happened to have a rather nice minister, Earl Howe, who was lovely. And I went and said, I've got a confession to make. I should probably have asked your advice and support. Though, of course, you couldn't have refused me as a woman doing this. So you'd have said yes, but I didn't ask you, and I should have done. So I really need ministerial sign-off. So if I send you a report on the first year, would you be kind enough to tell me you're happy with this programme? So he said, yes, and he did. So we got ministerial support. But it was very funny. And I said to Russell, why didn't you tell me that before? And he said, because a minister might have said no. You didn't know those bits?
No, I didn't. I saw the letter. I got hold of the letter. I was not involved at any point. I'm not a medic. But it did instantly. So this must have happened, I guess, around the time that I was becoming gender equality champion in the university. And it certainly focused minds. Now, I came from a department that already was bronze stroke silver, I can't remember. So, we were clean. And the university itself, by that point, was doing quite well. But I think the clinical...
Not the medical school.
But the clinical school, almost certainly not, no. And, I mean, Athena Swan is fantastic. And at that point, I thought it was brilliant. I worry now that it's become a sort of machine that is so large that I worry about consistency of standards. I worry about the fact that it is now one size fits all, whether you're philosophy or history or physics or clinical school, and the problems are different. Yeah. So within this university, we had, the first thing I'd done when I became I was director of this thing called Women in Science, Engineering and Technology Initiative, which we kind of wound down because Athena Swan seemed to be covering it. And then when Athena Swan rolled out to all the departments, we decided we would revive WYSETIC because there are issues that are specific for women in science. And, you know, they're partly around the highly competitive environment, the 24/7, how do you combine, as you said, children, serious career and all the rest of it.
Are your rats still alive in the experiment?
Yeah, exactly.
At the weekend?
If you are a historian, you can write at home in a way that you can't look after your rats at home, I hope. So I think there are differences. We've come a long way, but there are still, I think people think the problems are solved.
No, it isn't.
And they're not. And so I was reading an article today in the Times Higher Ed, which was actually written by a man in Oxford who was an administrator, in fact. But he was saying he was taking the second 3 months of parental leave, and the comments that the sort of disbelief that a man would take parental leave. Now, we are not going to get to gender equality until it is assumed that the father can be, if you know, it doesn't have to be, but if it works for the family, it should be just as much involved. And so we have still got a long way to go before we get to equality.
I agree. So that was my blow for it. Others will have to pick it up, I think. Well, I mean, I continue to battle for it like you, but we don't want a tick box culture.
No.
So there's probably something to come
I
afterwards.
think we need to think harder about what really makes a difference. And it isn't about everyone inventing new wheels, because I think that's something else. Athena Swan seems hung up on what are you doing that's new, as opposed to, is it
Are
working?
you doing what we know works?
Yes, exactly. So I think that there are still things to be done. I'm not sure what they are, what they should be.
But it did upset people, including in this university. I had some of the rudest letters and phone calls I've ever had. One from the then head of Universities UK, which we responded with, the CMO has seen your letter and asked for it to be filed.
So you can be rude back. Yes. Very good. But presumably they learnt to live with it.
Yeah.
Not least because the money was...
The money.
Yes, I know. And that is a very powerful argument. It's a shame the moral argument isn't good enough, but if the moral argument won't work...
Well, I did it on economics. I said, how can we throw away half of our best brains?
Well, indeed.
You
Indeed.
know, what a waste for the country. And
Yes.
I think we're about to wake up post-Brexit to
I
exactly that issue.
I would love to think so. My attempt to talk about some of these issues last week on Sky News led to not quite death threats, but it was suggested I went and jumped off a bridge. I don't think that counts as a death threat.
I think that counts as bullying.
The Twitter account was locked after I complained. Yes. So, you know, we've got a way to go, but we have to keep speaking out. And I think what is so sad is, as I say, you're probably proud of plain speaking, and I'm sure people think I'm a plain speaker too, but it comes at a cost. And many people, men and women, don't want to have to expose themselves to, you know, even if they believe it's the right thing to stand up for, you know, if it comes at a cost. If you see bullying, if you watch it, I'm a great believer.
Oh, I call it.
Well, yes, you would.
Yeah.
I would. But some people feel it's too dangerous.
So I
speak
think
up.
it's incumbent on us who are senior to call it. So I called something recently. I saw bad behaviour, and I could see the people round felt it was too difficult. Either they weren't able to, or that it might impact on them. So I said, this behaviour won't happen in the future because I won't have it. And all the junior staff afterwards came and said, thank you.
Yes.
Because they didn't feel able. So I think we have to use our positions to call it as well.
I think that's absolutely right, but often the worst kind of bullying goes on where you don't see it because they suspect that you or I might call it out, so they won't do it in front of us. And I think this is, you know, when I hear stories that make me very uncomfortable, I know also that the people, if they're interacting with me, don't behave like that, so I never see it. And then
you and I know that people manage upwards differently from outwards
Yes.
and downwards, so I make it my business, at least in my own team, to make sure I've got quite a finger on it.
Yeah, but it's still very hard to
Yeah.
accuse someone if you
Yeah.
haven't seen it. That's
Yeah.
the trouble. That's what I find difficult. It's only if you observe it directly or
Yeah.
you see it in writing or
Yeah.
whatever it is. But we have to make people feel empowered to call it out. And so, I hope in this college we will introduce bystander training, for instance. My senior tutor's here, he'll tell me if we're doing it. Because I think for many people, the people serving in the bar, if they see things going on late at night when alcohol fueled, you want them to feel confident.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe I've got a 7-month-old granddaughter. Will it be okay when she's
I hope so.
at university? Well, I hope so too. But then I came here to Cambridge before even Churchill had gone mixed the year before. And I believe that when the colleges went mixed, everything would, it hasn't quite turned around. No, the numbers in medicine have really turned around, because I'm of the generation, as you must have been, that had a cap.
Yes.
There was a
There
limit
weren't
to how many
women
girls
when
could
I
go.
did it. Yeah. And now, of course, we've got the problem where many women, and lots of men too, want to work part-time. And no one wants to call that, because they think that's anti-women to call it. Yet it's, again, an economic fact.
Yes.
People want to work part-time or differently
Yes.
from the way they did, and we have to call it and train rather more.
Yes, which isn't happening yet, is it?
No.
I mean, you're not suggesting that people shouldn't work part-time.
No,
I think.
no, I'm just saying
We have to
recognise it
recognise
as an
it,
economic fact and plan for it. And men do it as well.
Yes.
It isn't a female thing.
Yes, well, it's probably more a female
More so.
thing. And in fact, certainly the lower rungs of medicine are primarily women, are they not? Certainly in GPs, it's
Yeah.
quite hard to find a
Yeah.
male GP. Yes. So what's your hope for the future?
Whew, that's very broad, isn't it? When I was young, I wanted to grow into one of those old ladies who travelled the world in a long skirt with great style and looked at architecture and culture with great style and grew old gracefully.
You can
Now I'm
still
getting
do that.
old, I could still do that. I mean, I want enlightenment, don't I? So I'm very unhappy personally about Brexit. What can we do that keeps us close to Europe? How can we bring up our children so that they are educated of everywhere, if that new of nowhere or somewhere or everywhere? But then if we're going to do that, what are we going to do because I think there is something about many people who feel disempowered and feel the world has marched on and they haven't got jobs. So I suppose what I want for the future is that we find a way to educate those people and bring them back into our society.
Yes.
To have successful communities.
I'm always intrigued, if you read novels of, say, the 20s, there's sort of this feeling, and indeed Victorian, this sort of aspirational for people who did not themselves have a great deal. It's a great desire to get enough training to go and be a school teacher, for instance. Yeah. And that is something that we have completely lost, and I don't know quite where. The inequality is obviously part of it. The haves and the have-nots have got further apart for all kinds of reasons, and I don't want to get political. But we have somehow lost, or not, our society means a lot of people feel there is nothing in it for them, and they don't care about other people. And I don't quite know how that happened. I didn't see that coming.
No, I don't think anybody, well, many did. And it's such a convergence of so many things, isn't it? An education system that wasn't good enough and probably is improving. Changes in jobs, so manual jobs were lost, and we took out the technical colleges.
Yes.
Which gave people skills and trades and things. We took them out. This feeling, I think media plays a big role, this aspiration to live the designer life. There's social media, there's so many things coming together.
Yes, and of course it's not just the UK, as we know. It's much more widespread than that. So somehow, conspicuous consumption is part of the designer
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And people talked about it, but as you say, it's all come together.
And my children say that when they went to university and shared flats, that they were much more careful with the food in the fridge than their friends. My older daughter was explaining about a roast chicken, that if it was roasted, she'd put the carcass in the fridge and then she'd tear bits off and make something with that. And then, because that's what I do, she'd boil up the bones
and
to make
soup.
stock
Yes.
for soup, you see. And
Yeah.
she said they all thought she was bonkers.
Yeah.
You've had your roast chicken, bin it. And things like that.
Yes.
And I taught them that if there's mould on the bread, you pull it off and you put it in the toaster. Maybe there are reasons why you shouldn't do that, but it always seemed to be. And if there's mould on top of the jam, you scrape it off.
There are some things I won't eat if they're mouldy. I'm quite nervous about cream and things.
Yeah, well, yes, I probably wouldn't eat cream, but jam and bread, yes.
Absolutely. Cheese.
Yes,
Yes, I was brought up that way
Yeah.
too. But I don't think that's...
No.
I don't think that's the answer.
It's this throwaway society
Yes.
of consumerism.
Yes, yes. Oh, well, I think at this point I should probably throw it open to questions from the floor. Thank you. It's intriguing. We can go on talking over dinner. We have some roving mics, I think. I will remind you about PERDA, but we can edit out any questions Sally doesn't feel comfortable answering. I'm sorry to sort of try and steer things away from politics, but...
well, you can try.
At one point I was told we couldn't even film it, which would have been disappointing. Do we have some questions? If not, I'll keep talking. Right, Adrian.
Dame Sally, I hope you won't interpret this as a political question, because it's not meant to be. But I'm starting from the preposition that medicine needs to move a long way away from politicians and government. It needs to be a very, very long arm's length, and you can discuss the structure of that. I was much encouraged by Monsieur Macron, who's appointed a professor of medicine as
Agnes,
Minister
yes,
of Health.
she's rather good.
I thought that was a great
Her
advance.
husband is the head of ANSERM, the big research agency.
Well, I thought that was most inspiring. And how do you think that medicine can reclaim the management and control of medicine and medical policy in this country? I mean, you are the most senior advisor to government, if I read your role correctly. I think you should be running medicine, not advising ministers and asking them whether you can do something or not do something. Ministers should move back and say, you should run it, we'll support you, we've got to provide some of the funding, but you're the boss. What do you think of that, please?
Well, lots of medics are not very good managers, so let me just explain my role. You're right, I'm independent advisor. In practice, as a result of the 2012 Act, I do very little in the NHS. My role is particularly public health, and I play a role that none of my predecessors played, cross-government, with DFID, Foreign Office, in global health. So I do a big global health role. I do comment and advise on the health service, but it is a complex business. So I'm very happy to have good managers managing hospitals and things, as it happens. I worked very well with the manager of the chief exec of my hospital. We had a good partnership. I'd go and park my backside on his desk and say, I've come for coffee because I think you're doing this wrong. And he'd say, what, why? And we'd have a debate and something would happen. Either I'd go away enlightened as to why he was doing it that way, or he'd go away enlightened as to why he could do it better. So I have no problem with managers. Do I think we should have it as close to politicians as it is? I would love to see it more separate. But in this country, because of the money coming through the parliamentary system, they will always be accountable. And we have a ridiculous situation at the moment where by law they're not as accountable as Parliament and the public hold them, so they don't even have the levers to make it do what they'd like it to do. So it's a pretty disastrous mess at the moment. If you want to separate it, then you have to have a different funding system, which then takes you into, do you want to move into an insurance-based system? And there was a review under Gordon Brown, it was a banker, and it began with W, about the health system, and he reckoned it would cost, at that stage in the early 2000s, an extra £1 billion a year to run an insurance system, and why not pay that on patient care? So, we could move to a much more separated system, and then I guess docs would begin to play a bigger role. So that's that bit of the question. The other bit is, why do docs not do it? And I think that the system has infantilized many doctors and colleges and things in a way that they don't know how to engage, to stand up and speak for what they know is right, they want to say. So they either don't, they just go to work and do their job and go home, or they stand up but somehow don't manage to say it in a way that is listened to constructively. So, and I think that's the way the system runs, that has over many years infantilized doctors. Don't know that my colleagues would like it said as brutally as that, but I think that's what it is.
There's a question there at the front.
Hello. Could I ask, what does your role as a chief science advisor involve?
So I'm no longer, since April last year, the chief scientific advisor as well, but almost every department has a chief scientific advisor whose job, again, it is to be an independent advisor to ministers and the policy teams, so the civil servants writing policy and making up the options for ministers, basically on what's the evidence and giving linkages to academics and how could you make things work, trying to get as many policies as possible piloted, evaluated, and rolled out. So bringing scientific method and thinking as well as evidence. And many of them have a budget, though rather small, to commission research or evaluations. I brought that into my job as Chief Medical Officer when I started in 2010, because part of my statutory role is to write an independent annual report on the state of the nation's health. So I actually do it by choosing the subject, getting experts to write each chapter well-referenced based on their expertise, and then my role is to choose the subject and then write the recommendations and the summary for government and policymakers. So I still draw on science in a very big way. And if you take the Ebola outbreak, I mean, clearly I played a big role, not just in the media, but in helping the government to formulate its response in this country and abroad. And I was informed by committees, but I was informed by colleagues, and I was very clear with everyone who knew much about it. If you think government or I, together or separately, are getting it wrong, give me a ring. If you hear something you think I need to know, give me a ring, send me an email. Please, treat me as a friend, because I'm doing my best to get this right. So I'm very open to that, and I will listen. I, in the end, have to take the decision and advise ministers, and there were, in Ebola, some quite difficult decisions.
Hi, I'm Esther Torok. I'm a clinical academic in the university here. I guess I've got a question which you may not be able to answer, which is, obviously we see women in science, entering science at undergraduate and early postgraduate level at sort of 50-50 or maybe above, and then there's a sharp drop-off. That hasn't really changed over the last few years as you go up the career path. There are obviously lots of initiatives that have been brought in over the past few years, but they don't yet seem to be working. And do you have any solutions to this? And is there anything else that you can perhaps tie money to that can change this?
My personal view, but I'd be pleased to hear from you whether you think I'm right, is we've done what we can in the main from the academic side. There are still some gender issues of behaviour and everything. And that where I think the biggest block now is in the demands of the NHS for service and the demands of the Royal Colleges for what you must be signed off for in your curriculum to be a consultant. And I think that the academic community need to work with the Royal Colleges to bring that into control. You don't have to have done 50 this is or that's to be a specialist. You need to say what you're going to specialise in and show you're competent, and it doesn't take as much time as many of them demand. But it's proving very difficult to get that right. I think funnily enough, that Brexit may help us a bit in this, because clearly we need more doctors coming through. And about 4 or 5 years ago now, David Greenaway, the economist who's Vice-Chancellor of Nottingham, did a big, you probably remember, review, The Shape of Medical Training. And it was accepted by government, and it seems to me to have been pushed into the long grass by the Royal Colleges. Well, it seems to be coming back out that we're going to try and train people to be generalists much faster. And that will fit with doing academia as well much more easily. It is this combination of trying to deliver everything and having 3 masters, service, training, and academia, that's pretty well unlivable with, isn't it? But do tell me.
But I mean, I think those challenges should be the same for women and men, and so...
Well, I think they are, but it is interesting that then you get the gender issues on top, but women take choices. So I mean, it is very difficult once you get children, who's going to do the primary role of the health of the childcare. I mean, I had a nanny, but I ran the nanny. My husband, we have a very interesting, straightforward, old-fashioned split. He runs the finances, I run the house, you know. So, partly because he's in Cambridge, as you know. If there were problems at school, the nanny went or I went, and so it was always me. And I think many women do want to do that. Other women look up and see the women at the top and say, oh, I don't want that life, and they make those choices. But we do need to change behaviours as well, and I think that's what we were talking about, and we need to move beyond Athena Swan, that's been helpful, and get into real behavioural change as well.
And certainly within purely academic, I think we need to think about what is rewarded. So you may know this book we produced, The Meaning of Success, because I think it didn't have traction in higher education the way we want it, because why is having a research group of 30 twice as good as having a research group of 15 kind of thing if you don't look after the 30? Yeah. And I think we haven't really properly addressed that. We still have this mind's bigger school of promotion, and I think that isn't necessarily getting the right outcomes.
I think the other thing is, as a woman, you're asked to be on committees and contribute to all these things because there just aren't very many of you. Yeah. And so you end up doing a lot more of that kind of corporate stuff, yes, when in fact you should be concentrating on your grant-funded research.
And you're not getting the recognition for that either.
And you don't get any credit for that.
But on the other
if you
hand,
don't do it, you might not get a job.
Sally's first step into the way up the ladder was because she was a woman. You do get opportunities as well. Yeah. And I think it's important not to lose sight that an early career man may not get the same opportunities. You may have, as a woman, far more than you can handle. But, you know, there are pros and cons in that, and I would certainly say the same.
And we have to learn how to say no.
Yes.
You know, which means prioritising. I've been doing that committee for a couple of years, and it's really rather boring, and I'm offered this one, so maybe I'm going to stop that one and do that. Yeah. And not feel guilty. We're all too good at feeling guilty, aren't we? At least I am.
Further questions? There's one in the middle there.
So sort of back to your role as chief medical, I was wondering if you ever had the difficulty of balancing the needs of the country compared to the needs of global health, or if there is such balance.
The reason I laugh is we've just been through a fairly grueling campaign to try and get the next Director General of the WHO, a Brit. We didn't succeed in getting him elected, but we did succeed in changing the agenda of the person who was elected to being exactly what we wanted: transparency, accountability and things. And I was explaining to ministers, including Boris, why they were going to support this campaign. And I did let slip that there would be times, if this particular candidate became the Director General of the World Health Organization, where I thought he would take decisions that were right for the world but not in Britain's interest. And I thought that made him a good candidate. I can't say that a certain minister thought that was such a good thing. But then he managed to forget about that and go out and campaign very well for us. So I can't think of examples at the moment, but I can conceive of them, where we're putting a lot of money into places where we might prefer to put it somewhere else for political reasons or security reasons, yet it is the right thing for the world to put it there, Or, you can think about if you get some really nasty outbreak of something nasty, what do you do? Do you isolate them? Do you let them come into the country? How do you handle it? So there can be ethical issues too. And when we were handling the pandemic of flu in 2009 and then Ebola, we did have a standing ethics group to give advice if we needed it. So yes, you can get tensions.
So there's one, Jennifer, right by you.
Hi. I was just wondering, as your career has progressed, have you found that, the issues, potential gender issues and things have changed as you've gone up the career ladder? And as an undergraduate student, what advice would you give to females coming into the medical industry?
So the first is to assume in general that it's cock-up rather than conspiracy. People have done me down, and occasionally it was intentional and I should have been paranoid, but in general it's been cock-up, and they didn't particularly mean to do me down. They might not have wanted to help, but I think the same goes for gender, that you have to start from an assumption that people want to get it right rather than they set out to get it wrong, but I would try and call it if they do get it wrong and say, oi, that isn't right, you shouldn't be doing that or saying that. So that's one thing I'd say. I think for me, I've had a very odd career because it's been like that. And what I set out to do was be a paediatrician, then it was too general, so I became a hematologist and it was too general. So I then ended up doing sickle cell disease. So I clearly have been on quite a journey, and I like change, and I like grasping opportunities. So trying, when there are opportunities, a committee or something else, grasping them, trying them out, experimenting, I think is good, and people then see that you're eager and trying to learn. But enjoy the journey. I didn't expect to end up running R&D for the nation's health, and I didn't set out to, and I never thought I'd be CMO. Why would I ever think that? I mean, there were people who believed that they were going to be CMO that I trounced, of course. But if you enjoy the journey, then it doesn't matter where you end up. So I think it's very important enjoying the journey.
In an era when even some supposedly educated people have had enough of experts, how do you strike the balance in public health between informing people of information that they have a right to know that's been derived scientifically and lecturing them about what is in their interests?
The nanny state.
Well, I wasn't going to put it that way, but...
There is a Times cartoon of me being a nanny. Well, there are two sides to this. Do I set out to be nanny? No, I set out to make sure that the world knows the evidence as it is at the moment, knowing it'll change and being quite honest about that. What seems to happen is that newspapers like the Daily Mail don't like the evidence, so then, in order to undermine me, they try and cast me as nanny. So I just have to play that out, You want to cast me as nanny? Well, I'm not. I do believe people have a right to be told what the evidence is at the moment. So I just have to stick to that. And on alcohol, that's played out and doesn't go away. And I try very hard not to be photographed with a glass of alcohol.
We will provide soft drinks tonight.
Yeah, I'll drink them while there are cameras around. It also saves me lots of calories. On Obesity, it's much more difficult because, and we fund Teresa Marteau here in Cambridge to do work on this, and she's particularly good at it. But there are two sides. One is the automatic, oh, there's nice food and the pleasure you get from it, and another is then coming in later, the thinking about it. And it is very difficult, at least for me, and I think for most people, making sure that you eat the right amount. So then you get into behavioural economics. How can you nudge people and make it easy for them to eat healthy and not overeat, and difficult to eat poor quality, high fat, high calorie food? And then, so you need a different approach on that sort of thing. But it's a complex area, and I don't say I get it right all the time, but I try not to hector, try not to lecture, try to give the evidence.
Thank you. So following on from that, are you in favour of this sugar tax?
Yes, the sugar levy, yes. The evidence, I mean, I'm very evidence-based, suggests it will work and reduce consumption. And in fact, it's quite a clever wheeze of the economists in the Treasury that it could be passed on, it could be absorbed by the companies, or they could reformulate. And already they're changing their formulations and they're changing their advertising. So I think we're going to get a reduction in calories as a result. And we know that the people who drink sugary soft drinks are generally the lower income people, so it will help. Whether it'll help as much as the modelling shows is another matter. Only time will tell. But I was very in favour, because that is a nudge to industry, and more than a nudge, a potential tax on individuals.
Well, then what about all the business with diet drinks that we hear now actually, inverted commas, might make you fat?
You mean the diet cokes and things like that? I think the science is evolving. I am concerned that it may turn out to be true. And of course the answer is we do need water, but what more do we need? And a lot of this is taste, and you can re-educate taste. For salt, if you take salt out of your diet, added salt, after 4 weeks, if you put it back, you get a shock. And sugar is apparently the same, though it takes a bit longer. And if you look at the food, for some cereals, for instance, we have higher sugar cereals than many parts of the world. Why on earth are we not getting low sugar ones? And so there is a question as to how we reduce sugar, reduce high fat, and educate people. And if it turns out that those sugar substitutes are playing a role in obesity, then what we're going to do about it. But it is reaching for a drink is habit. How can we change people to reach for something that's less unhealthy?
I agree with that, but I also don't like being told what I should and shouldn't drink or eat.
But I don't mind what you drink or eat, but my advice would be in moderation. Oh, and take some exercise in moderation. Don't damage yourself.
Right, Adrian's been dying to ask another question, and then we probably should wrap up.
I'm a firm Remainer, but...
Wait for the mic.
Thank you. I'm a firm Remainer, but it occurred to me that Brexit might give one advantage. Will we be able to leave the European Working Time Directive, which was one factor which did more to destroy morale in medicine and destroy the mutually supporting teams that kept people going against all adversity than any other factor? Do you think we might be liberalised to be more flexible in the UK
we'll
again?
We'll clearly be able to be. Whether we will do that
is this
is
a
another matter.
related question?
I would suggest that life has moved on and that we actually need to train people differently, much more with simulations and things. And I would not like young doctors to lead the hours I led. They were not compatible with a life as well. So I'd be surprised if, though we would have the right to liberalise, we do, but there we are. Maybe we will. But I would like young doctors to have a better quality life and And for hospitals, and I think the GPs are generally much better, but for hospitals to treat them as a treasured possession for the time they're on loan to them than to treat them as cannon fodder to deliver stuff. And I don't know how we can get them back to that. But I, when I was a young doctor, was looked after by my hospitals. I was proud of my hospitals, and they looked after me, and they got a very good service for their patients as a result.
Well, on that note, I think we should probably wrap up. Some people will want to drink, but it's entirely your choice whether you have one or not. There will be drinks in the buttery. Thank you so much. That's been fascinating. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.